Hey, what do you think the best weapon is in Exanima? So let's go over some Halberd stats gathered from some fallen foes here. We're going to look at the weight of the weapon and then the basic condition stats. Now, this game makes procedural weapon um, within a set degree of change, so you'll have different head shapes, spear shapes, lengths, all that kind of stuff. But there's a correlation between the impact of the weapon and the weight of the weapon. So if you want the most impact, which will push people to the ground when you hit them, you want the weight to be all the way as far right as you can. You'll sacrifice some balance, but you will throw people on the ground in one swing. And if you have the most impact, that will apply to your thrust attacks too. So if you have a halberd that procedurally generated a large spearhead with, 2 to 3 to 3.5, you know, registers of thrust damage, that will apply to your impact, and you can just run people over. And this is super valuable, especially when you're keeping your distance from people, which makes this weapon a super good offensive and defensive weapon. The only other weapon that can get max weight consistently is a poleaxe, but you kind of have to find one that will be that long as a halberd, and it's really rough to find a max weight poleaxe, and it will still kind of be just like a halberd, and they often get max weight anyways. You'll see them in the stores or off people where they're generally millimeters from the end weight or all the way at the top. Here's a fight where I'm using a pole hammer, and it is as long as I've seen them. It has the weight pretty close to the end there, but not as near as close as a halberd could get. So it is shorter than most halberds, but it's longer than most pole hammers, and I think this might be one of my favorite weapons now. The pole hammer is one of my favorite weapons, and I always try to find a reason to use it. It's a good all-arounder. It has decent balance, and that's because it's never max weight like the halberd or some poleaxes. So it's always like a foot shorter, which matters in this game. It's such a physics-based outcome. You can't throw people to the ground consistently, and the impact is always a lot less than you want. It's got high crush damage, which is great for fighting knights and beasts, but with the exception of the beast, you have to get in when other people are attacking it because it's just not long enough. You can't back up fast enough and escape the master beast's attack. It lets you be a little bit lighter on your feet with the balance and everything like that. They're just not long enough to also be a great super defensive weapon like the halberd. And here are some examples of just a random pool of pole hammers. You can look at the weight, it never quite gets to the end. The impact stays around 4, maybe 3.5, but it does have decent crush, but it has no real other advantage to it other than a slightly better balance. You'll see 2, 2.5, sometimes 3 if it's a very short pole hammer in perfect condition, like flawless and exceptionally well made, all that stuff. But this is what you'll generally see. Great crush. Sometimes they'll have a spear on the end. Now, I have spent hours in this game in arena mode with the merchant just looking at expert weapons, which are where the pole arms fit into, like the great sword, the pole axe, the pole hammer, the halberd, all those really long weapons. I guess the greatsword isn't a pole arm, but it has the length that makes it very useful in those really rough fights where you're surrounded by people or you're fighting the master beast, which is got a huge spike club. So the high balance on the greatsword is awesome for moving around, but you'll find that its slash damage and its lower impact just doesn't quite get the job done consistently on the Master Beast, in my opinion, unless you're really squirrely, which is good. It lets you do that, but I think the fight takes twice as long, so there's more chances for a mistake. But you'll see me here looking at pole arms, pole axes, pole hammers, and what I'm doing is I'm going into my character sheet and I'm actually just directly comparing the length of the weapon because they're all slightly different. You can find 2 pole axes that are almost the same stats, but one will have maybe a little bit different weight, which means it's a little bit longer or shorter, and then some of them almost get as long as a halberd, and I just often find the pole axes are just more consistent with landing that like headshot. The axe is great. It has a little bit of crush damage. Some of them even have spear tips, but the search for the perfect pole axe is basically finding something slightly better or the same as your average halberd. So I kind of give that up, and I still claim a halberd is the best unless you like the poleaxe and you find one that is as long as a halberd, which is possible. I've recently done it. Jesus. So here we are again in Exanima character sheets. This is where I'm just going to go over and take a look at these halberds that I have and why I think they're the best. I'm going to compare them to the pole axes that I like. And you'll see that I'm really just looking at the range I'm given and trying to keep the weight, the impact, and the slash and crush pretty consistently, like 3-4 points. But it's the impact and the weight that I'm concerned about because that's correlated to the length. So you'll see me go ahead and compare these together, and you'll see why I generally don't use pole hammers for like a fight that I think is serious, like with the Master Beast or something I'm trying to make a lot of money off of. Expert Beast or Master Beast, the pole hammer is just kind of short, and you can see that right here. When I'm comparing all these weapons together, you can get a pole axe to be almost or as long as most of the halberd, which is great because if you don't want slash and piercing damage, a pole axe has slash and crushing, which I think is a superior balance. But most of the time, the halberd is the longest, so I think that's your safest bet. And yeah, just take a look at what I'm comparing here and why I'm doing it. And this is kind of my settled opinion at the moment, where a halberd is easier to come by, maxing out the impact, than a poleaxe. If you can find that poleaxe, that's great. Tournaments are great for winning flawless weapons, and so if one shows up, hopefully it's long and it's one that you like to use. I don't care about balance that much. You just make it work, even if it's kind of wonky. Yeah, and take a look at these pole hammers here and why they're just significantly shorter. You can find ones that get kind of close, which is great because a good headshot with this will always kill somebody. But they end up being on average like a foot shorter and just not quite the same impact. So when you do your major swing and you step your guy into it and you're trying to just flatten a person to the ground in one hit, it can happen, but it's just so much easier with the halberd, in my opinion. And so the pole hammers, great for damaging people and combatants, but I think it's just too much risk on some of the longer armed, like the Master Beast. And then if you're trying to fight like 3 people who have pole arms too, the balance is great. You can get defensive and block a lot, but you're still relying on like a nice solid head crunch. But to keeping distance, nothing beats the halberd. Obviously, fighting somebody with no armor, you're just going to one tap them most of the time, but the range on this, and even not a direct hit, is why these weapons end up being so great. So I'm still a big fan of the poleaxe and the halberd being the top tier, S tier level of weapon in the Exanima arena. Alright, let's see if I can't fool these guys. Oh no. Aha! Furniture Warrior 1. Peasant 0.